presentation today, what I want you to leave from this is, or get from this is, what are the success factors for having a really successful vegetable garden? We're going to go really broad with the information, not so deep because of the time that we have available to us. So I do provide links via QR codes on each one of the sections that we'll talk about, where you can find a lot more information about the particular subject that we're talking about. So have your cell phone handy, and you can take a picture or get the link from the QR codes that we have in each one of the sections. And whether you are a new gardener or an experienced gardener, there's always something to learn. I learn something new every week, when it comes to gardening. So I hope that you get a lot of great information from this. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. All right. So, all right, so the best practices to get the most out of your garden. We'll talk about 6 different things. Beginning with a plan, taking care of your soil, getting that ready, making sure that you plant at the right time. That's exceptionally crucial. How to take care of them, how to harvest and keep harvesting, and then winterizing your garden. And for me, those are the 6 ways to make sure that not only the current crop or season that you're working with is successful, but also for future seasons. Okay, number 1, beginning with a plan. It may sound basic, but you really do need to start with an idea of what you want to do. Okay, first and foremost, only plant what you like to eat. This may sound ridiculous, but there's so many people who are so excited to continue with their garden or start with gardening, and they want to plant everything, and even if they don't like it. And I'm like, okay, you can do that. So the worst case scenario is you have a bunch of things that you're successful with, but you don't like to eat. So then you're stuck with, well, what am I going to do with it? So really stay with what you like to eat, whether it's just for you or the people in your life. If you like cherry tomatoes, get that. If you don't like Brussels sprouts, then absolutely do not waste the time or space on them. Okay, it can get a little overwhelming with all the different seed packets and transplants, especially this time of year. You're starting to notice more of those things in the stores. If you're just starting out with gardening or have a little bit of experience, go ahead and do several. I'd say no more than 4 or 5 vegetables. Start a little with things you can be successful with, do you think? And then once you get a lot of wins under your belt, you know how to do things, then you can add more and different and more complex vegetables into your garden. Like when I started gardening, I chose a watermelon, which I thought looked cool. Okay, really not for our season here. And I didn't know how to do it. So make sure that you can grow things that you think you can have some success with and things that you like, and make sure you're just realistic with it. Okay, we'll talk about different gardening methods, and you can choose which one is right for you. There's going to be, I think, 4 different methods that we have, and we'll talk about what they are and a little bit about the pros and cons for each of them. It's the in-ground bed, the raised bed, straw bales, and container gardens. And keep those 4 in mind as you answer 5 questions about what kind of bed is or method is the best for you. You got to figure out like how much space do you have for the garden, how much time you want to spend on it, what types of things you want to grow, what kind of tools for gardening do you have available to you, and then how much money do you want to spend on it, whether it's new tools, building materials, things like that. So once you have an understanding of what those questions or those answers are for you, then it'll become pretty clear pretty quickly what method is the best. Okay, the first one we'll talk about is in-ground. That's your traditional garden that you use the native soil that you have. They grow directly in the ground, the plants that is. If you have a lot of space, a lot of sunny space that's unobstructed, that's a great option. And if you plan on growing a lot of plants, doing some market gardening, or if you want to try really some larger plants, then this is a really good option for you. Pros and cons. Okay, the pros side of life for in-ground is that usually it's cheaper than a lot of the other methods. That is, if you have good soil. You don't need to buy building supplies. The in-ground soil retains water and nutrients a whole lot more than the other methods. And then you pretty much have unlimited depth for good root structure to grow, which is good. On the not so great side of it, there is a lot of work needed if you need to prepare your soil. In our area, we have a lot of clay soil. So your in-ground soil, especially in suburban areas, may be compacted, may have a lot of clay. Not so great for starting a garden. So you're going to have to do a lot of work to get it to a point where it can be good. You're also going to have higher weed and pest pressure because it's at ground level. It's pretty much an invitation for the unwanteds to be into your garden. Also in the springtime here, you're going to get a little slower start because it's going to be cooler longer, the soil is. And also very muddy soils you cannot plant in, or you shouldn't be planting in them. So you're going to have to wait a little bit. And then usually in-ground requires some amount of tilling, which we're not a huge fan of, and we'll talk about that later, because basically it destroys your soil structure and it really destroys a lot of the worms that we need for the soil. Okay, the next one is raised beds. So raised beds are pretty much like large, like bottomless frames or containers that sits on top of your soil on your ground. You can make them out of brick, you can make them out of wood, metal, lots of different options. These are a really good option for places that have poor soils for in-ground and for plants that don't need a lot of room. You'll notice a lot of community gardens have a raised bed. I have raised beds because my soil is not the best. So I have a little bit mix of in-ground and raised bed. There are some pros and cons for raised beds. On the good side, they can be built to your specs. You can make them as large or as small as you want. You're going to have less weeds and less pest pressure. You're going to have better drainage. You can control the quality of the soil because you're literally putting that soil in. So you have the final say what kind of soil goes in there. It's easier to maintain and harvest. And also, if you want to do what's called intensive gardening, really trying to get the most harvest out of the square footage they have available, raised beds are a great option for that. Now, on the other side, it's going to be a little more costly. You're going to have to find building materials or buy them. Also, once they're built, they're usually pretty tough to move. So you got to make sure you know where you're going to be putting that. It's also going to need a little bit more water than the in-ground because it's going to warm up faster and it's going to dry out faster. So you need to really monitor that. And you have what's called a fixed planting space where if you have in-ground, sometimes you have lots of space. You can go wherever you want, but you only have a particular area where you can actually garden. Okay, here's a pro tip. Make sure when you construct your bed that you can reach the middle from both sides. I've seen raised beds that people made 8 by 8. I'm like, wow, that's going to be a challenge, especially since there's no walkway in the middle of it. Do not make it more than 4 feet wide because that's about the reach that most people have, whether you're young or older. About 4 feet, you don't want it any wider than that. As far as the frame's height is concerned, anywhere from 6 inches to 12 inches should be good, depending upon the types of vegetables you want to grow. The taller, like around 10 or so, is going to accommodate the widest variety of vegetables that need different root depths. And then whatever you do, please do not walk in them. Do not walk in your raised beds because it compacts the soil, and that's really bad news. That's really tough to recover from. Okay, the next method is straw bales, and this kind of come into popularity the last 10 years or so, where the straw bales actually serve as the growing medium that actually is going to give the nutrients to the plants, as well as the container for the plants. You can use both seeds and transplants or starts. As the straw bale decomposes, it provides the nutrients that the plants need. And this is a great option for small spaces. And again, for areas that have subpar soil for in-ground gardening. Whatever you do, though, do not use those decoratives, like those big decorative bales that you may see at big box stores and craft stores, because they do have some carcinogenic materials in there to prevent flames and to prevent fires. So the retardants are not anything you want near your food producing plants. Okay, pros and cons. Straw bales are great to move around. You can move them here, you can move them there. When they get waterlogged, they get a little heavy, but they're much easier to move than like containers or anything else. You don't have to dig with these. You can use them for both transplants and you can direct seed in them. For me, in my experience, this is one of the most least physically taxing types of gardening. This is really a great option for people with limited mobility, children. So it's a very accessible form of gardening. And also it can be composted at the end of the season, which is nice. The not so great side is that you need to do what's called conditioning for the straw bales. That takes anywhere from like 14 to 21 days or so. Pretty much you want to get it to a point where it's starting to decompose in the middle before it becomes a viable option for growing plants in it. They can also dry out fairly quickly. They're going to need a lot more fertilizing. And depending upon what kind of straw you get, it could have a pesticide or an herbicide in there. So when you do source them, find out what kind of chemicals have been put on, if any. And also having hay laying around can be a little attractive to the local fauna, like rabbits and deer, groundhogs. They love this. So if you live in an area with that kind of pressure, you might want to reconsider or know that, and so you can do something about it. And then by the end of the season, it could look pretty rough. So if you really want your garden to be aesthetically pleasing visually, then you might want to consider a different method. Okay, so this is very important, and I learned this the hard way. There is a difference between straw and hay. So straw is what we consider a byproduct of grain processing, where it's literally the stalks that are left after the seed heads have been cut off. Hay is what's usually fed to livestock. It's loaded with seeds, so it's where they get their protein from. It could be from grasses, it could be from straw, it could be from lots of things. Hay is going to create little plants for you because the seeds are going to drop. And sometimes that's okay because it can create a nice cover crop. But if you don't want to weed a lot, then I highly recommend you make sure it's made of straw. Okay, the next gardening method is containers. This is growing in rapid popularity, especially over the COVID situation we had. Containers are used for both seeds and for transplants. It's a great way to garden in very small spaces. You can do it on balconies. I have tomatoes in my windowsills. You can do it on porches. You can do it on patios. You can actually put container gardens in like a larger garden area, like an in-ground garden. There's lots of flexibility when it comes to containers, and it's a great way to build your gardening skills. So if you're just starting out, a container garden is a great way to go. And also container gardening includes hanging baskets. A lot of people forget about that, but you can grow some pretty cool things from a hanging basket. Okay, so pros and cons of containers. Definitely, it's a great thing you can move containers around. So say, for example, you have a really shaded yard, but you have that one area and that one place that has got enough sun, put a container there. And if you see that throughout the season, that area seems to be moving, with the sun, you can definitely move that container to be where the sun is at all times. That also has fewer weeds and pests, just like the raised bed. You do not need expensive tools with container gardening, and you don't even need a plot of land. So that's a really good part of that. It's also very accessible to people of all physical abilities, just like a straw bale is. And if you want to get into some vertical gardening, containers are the way to go. On the flip side, it needs more watering. You're going to be fairly limited to plants that are not so huge with containers, unless you get a really, really, really big container. And then at that point, it kind of turns into a raised bed. You're not going to get as much high yield as you would from an in-ground or raised bed. And some containers can get pretty pricey, depends on if you want to go and buy one. Otherwise, you can upcycle them. And you're going to need to make sure that the containers the soil has a lot of nutrients for your plants, because it is a fixed amount of soil, which means it's a fixed amount of nutrients in there. So you're going to have to monitor that to make sure your plants have what they need. Okay, so here's the first of many of the resource slides. These are QR codes that'll take you, or which are links to different extensions and cooperatives, one from Clemson, we have one from Penn State, and then University of Illinois Extension about raised beds, straw bales, and container gardens. So feel free to, you can either take a picture of this or you can, grab the link right now if you want to. Okay, so next we're going to move on to site selection. That is another part of making sure your garden is successful. You need to make sure you're putting it in the right place. And what I mean by the right place is it needs to have sunlight. You need to have adequate direct sunlight, usually 5 to 6 hours between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. A lot of people think, I've got sun all morning. Morning sun is good. However, morning sun is not going to carry the load that the really heavy feeders like tomatoes and corn and those, they really need full direct sun in the afternoon and early evening. So between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. for most vegetables, that's the optimal time to get the 6 hours of sunlight. There are some vegetables that require far less than that, more of your leafy greens, radishes and things like that. But for the majority of vegetables, it needs about 6 hours. When it comes to the building, the south, southwest, or southeast side is going to get you the most sunlight. And then when you're figuring out where this is going to be in your location, check the area several times during the day to find out which is the best. I've been doing this for a while, and sometimes I think, okay, how much sunlight does my XYZ get? And it's kind of hard. You think but no, not necessarily. Also, trees and other buildings are a factor to put into that. Like if a particular area is shaded during from 1 to 5, that may count that area out. The second thing is you need to make sure you have easy, consistent access to water. Please don't make it difficult for yourself by having a garden way far away from a spigot or a water source, because I will guarantee you're going to get tired of that. And your garden is going to suffer, and you'll be like, okay, well, this was a waste. Please have easy, consistent access to water. Again, whether it's a spigot or if you can put a rain barrel there, that is an option too. Also, make it as level as possible. And that applies to all the different methods that we just talked about. You need to make sure it's level because the drainage needs to be consistent and level. Otherwise, it's going to pool up in one area, and that's not good. And stay away from black walnut trees. The roots give out a chemical called juglone, and that is an inhibitor, and it will not allow anything to be grown around it. So your garden won't even have a fighting chance if you're going to put it away or put it near black walnut trees. Whoops, I couldn't hear you. What's that? There you go.
Could you talk a little bit about vertical gardening? Sure.
So vertical gardening, that is the process or the technique of literally growing up. It provides a lot of good airflow. It saves space, and it makes it really easy to harvest when you have vegetables that are growing up. Good ideas of growing vegetables that grow up. Let's see, cucumbers. I always grow cucumbers on a trellis. A lot of people like to let them go on the ground, but I find I get a much better harvest when they're up, far less disease and insect pressure when they're up. Let's see, beans, pole beans, I put up. Some zucchinis you can put up on trellises. So definitely take advantage of the airspace that's above your garden, because that's a whole opportunity for you to maximize your yield.
There was another question about vegetables good for hanging baskets.
Mm-hmm. There are many different types of tomatoes that are great. There's like tumbling Tom is a good one. There are some, actually we sell a variety of eggplant that's excellent for hanging baskets. There are, let's see, there's some zucchini that are great for hanging baskets. The words you want to look for, whether it's in a transplant or a seed packet, is you want to look for the phrase excellent for containers, or let's see, it spills over. So those are great. And also there's really nice varieties of strawberries that you can do that are really nice with that. Anything else?
There's a couple more, but they're gonna be covered a little later, so I'll jump in with them when we get there.
Cool. Okay. Okay, so here's something very, very important. If you can, choose a location for your garden in a place where you're going to see it every day, because literally out of sight is truly out of mind. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that if have it in a place where you or somebody who you trust can see it every day, because then you're going to know what it needs. You're going to be able to act on things faster. You're going to see when things are ready. And because when it's harvest time, it's go time. So make sure that you're going to be able to see your garden every day. Now, obviously, this is not going to apply like if you have a community garden plot. But if you have something that you can do on your balcony or somewhere on your property, you want to make sure you can actually see it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about like the garden layout. So if you figured out kind of what you want to grow and the method you want to do it, now we need to figure out, okay, let's figure out how we're going to lay out those vegetables. And it doesn't matter what kind of method you're using or what you're growing, there are universal guidelines. These are things that you need to keep in mind when you lay out your garden. First and foremost, work with the light. You want to make sure that you put short things like bush beans, cabbages, others, on the south side, okay? Put tall things like those that are on trellises, tall tomatoes, things like that on the north side. Because then the north side won't, if they're on the north side, they will not shadow and take the light away from the shorter vegetables. Secondly, if you have perennial vegetables like asparagus, put them towards the side in a sunny location because they're going to stay in the same location. So make sure they have their own little spot. Also, you want to rotate your annual crops every year. So I'm just going to move this guy here real quick. And then plant upwards, like we just talked about, on trellises and fences. Use fences. Those are a great, in-ground, very sturdy option if you have one. And then also, if you have a large enough garden, whether it could be any of the methods, do create walking paths for you that are at least 30 inches wide, because that's going to accommodate you plus lugging some stuff with you that you invariably do when you have gardens. And that's going to give you at least 30 inches of like good space. So you're not crashing into anything. You're not going to break any limbs, whether your own or a plant. And it's much better that way. Okay, so we'll talk about 3 different types of layouts. The first one is a traditional row. That's where you have each type of vegetable gets its own row and evenly spaced increments, at least 18 inches apart. North-south direction has the best sun exposure. Like I said before, tallest at the north, go all the way down, medium in the middle, and then shortest in the south part of the traditional row. And if you have a large in-ground garden, this is a really nice way to do it. Traditionally, and we say traditionally because most people laid out their gardens that way because they had large garden implements, whether it's a horse or an ox, or now we've got tractors. Rows are best for that. But with the home gardener, that may not necessarily be the best option for you. You could also do what's called a block or wide row. This is something you can use with in-ground bed or a raised bed. You can even do straw bales in this way as well, where you literally plant vegetables in rectangular shaped blocks. Okay, make them about 3 to 4 feet wide, but you can make them as long as you want. Okay, again, north-south orientation, just like the other ones. This is really, really good for succession planting. And there's many different ideas and instructions on how to do this online. I found it interesting, like the gardens at Mount Vernon and at Monticello for Jefferson and Washington there's a lot of blocks or wide row gardens there. So they've been doing this since the 1710s. Okay, the next one is square foot gardening. This is very, very popular. I've used this many times. This is great with kids too. You literally divide your space into 1 foot square sections, and you can do this in a raised bed and you can do this in ground. And then each type of vegetable is put into the individual square. This is an intensive garden method where you can produce a very, very high yield in a smaller space. And there is a recommended number of vegetables per square. And when I first started reading into it, I thought, there is no way I can put 9 bush bean plants in a square foot. And you absolutely can. You can put up to 16 radishes per square foot, and it actually works. So if you're looking to up your skills a little bit with the harvest and the amount of yield, this might be a good option for you. Whoops. Okay, why did you work? Okay, so here are some garden resources for both traditional rows, the wide row planting, and square foot gardening. The Square Foot Gardening Foundation is a very interesting website to peruse. Lots of great information there. The other two have scientifically based, research-based information on the best practices for you to get the highest yield with the least amount of work from University of Georgia and the University of Wisconsin's Extension Services. Okay.
I
Next.
have one question.
Yeah.
You're going to touch on succession planting in a little bit, but is there a place they can find more information about the number of types of veggies in a square foot?
Yes, the Square Foot Foundation or Square Foot Gardening Foundation will have all that information for sure. This one here. Going on the right. Yes, and also a lot of the other university extensions, I think Wisconsin has them, Purdue is another good source. They have very similar to the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. They also have a recommended number of plants you can put in. Like I know, for example, tomatoes, that requires 2 to 3 of the square feet. Bean plants, you can do 9. Pepper plants, that's 1 plant per square foot. Lettuce, 16. I mean, or like the leaf lettuce. Now, when it comes to like head lettuce, 1. So you can really figure out, okay, how much of a vegetable you want, and then you will grow that accordingly.
Have you ever put berries in a vegetable garden? Are there any good suggestions?
Berries in any kind of garden?
Yeah.
Yes. That speaks to the diversity of the types of plants you want to put in there. That would be considered a perennial plant. So you want to make sure that it's in the right place because it's going to be there for quite a long time. Yeah, I've grown blueberries and blackberries so far. Blueberries are kind of tricky in our area, but blackberries and raspberries do beautifully here. And they attract a lot of different pollinators and a lot of different animals who would love to take my stuff before I got to it. So, plan ahead.
There's also a question about best plants for containers versus the ground. I don't know if there's a general size guideline you could give.
Let's see. Yeah, so the in-ground plants can be much larger varieties of a particular type of plant. Like, for example, there are pepper plants that can be 12 inches tall to 18 inches tall to 3 feet tall. So the in-ground, you're going to have a lot more flexibility when it comes to the height, and also the bigger the plant, the larger the roots and the deeper the roots need to go. So in-ground is going to provide that space for you. So with containers, depending upon how large the containers are, you can fit lots of things, but they need to be like in our plant guide we're going to have this year. Our vegetables are going to be marked as like container friendly or small space friendly. Those are varieties that will do very well in containers. So I'd say, for a container, I would do no more than 3 feet tall for a particular variety of a plant, because then it's going to get a little unwieldy. It could actually be top heavy. You get a good gust of wind, it's going to blow over. But if you have a really large container, a tall one, you can do a little bit taller vegetable with that. So just depends on like the size of the containers. You want to make sure it's proportional, but I would say definitely no more than 3 feet tall for any kind of container.
Okay, and then a morning sun veggies on the deck. Are there some veggies that are better in less sun?
Yes, you can do lettuce. You can do radishes. Let's see. yeah, some of the cole crops like, let's see, arugula, and you can do, I think, some forms of broccoli and maybe cauliflower. If it gets a lot of morning sun, you can do that.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a couple other questions, but they're gonna fit into it, the other sections, so.
Good.
If questions have not been answered, I haven't forgotten you.
Okay, the next part is talking about soil. This is very, very important. This is, I consider, the real black gold. This is crucial to the success of your garden, because if your soil is not great, then your garden is not going to be great. If you've got great soil, there's a really good chance you're going to have a great garden. You're going to have a really nice, healthy yield. So what soil is, it's soil anchors plant roots, and it's the storehouse for the nutrients. It consists of minerals, air, water, dead organic matter, and living organisms, all of that into your soil. It's crucial that you prepare it. You prepare it for the season ahead before the season starts. And the best types of soil for home gardening, and it doesn't matter where you're doing this, it needs to be well draining. It needs to be loose and fertile and have a pH range of about 6 to 7. Most vegetables need 6 to 7. Things like blueberries need a little bit more acid. That's why our native soils need to be amended a lot in order for them to grow successfully here, because we have more alkaline soils. So that's really going to affect the soil pH as well. And the soil pH is important to know, because the pH levels regulates the plant's ability to take nutrients. So you may have great soil, like it's going to be nutrient rich, you have lots of organic matter, but if the pH is off, it doesn't matter, because then the plant really literally cannot take up those nutrients into the soil. So that is one thing that you absolutely need to find out. Low pH is considered acidic. That's very common in a lot of the desert areas in the American West, and also on the East Coast. They've got a lot of acidic areas. Also on the sandy areas of Michigan, lots of acidic soils. That's why they can grow berries so beautifully up there. In our area, our pH is a little higher. We tend to have more alkaline soils, and that's courtesy of the parent material of limestone that we have under. Our soils are based on that, so they'll always be acidic. And if you want to have acidic soil to grow something, you will always be amending the soil. It'll never be done. So choose those vegetables that will do well here. And most all of them will. Again, there's very, very few that require super acidic soil. Okay, for in-ground soil, it needs to be what we call loamy, right? Full of organic material, drain well. To figure out what kind of soil you have, you can do what we call the squeeze test, where you literally get a ball of soil in your hand when it's a little damp, right? You give it a squeeze, and then you open your hand, and it's a dirt ball, right? And so if you tap it and it crumbles easily, then it's nice soil. But if you have the ball and it looks like it's nice and really glued together, and you tap it and it's still glued together, that means it probably has a lot of clay. And if you have the soil block in your hand or the ball in your hand and it just falls apart, without even poking it, that means it's probably too sandy. Now, I've never seen too sandy soil in here or in our area. It's mostly clay soils and loam soils. So it's going to be more clayey than anything. You can also do a drainage test to see what kind of drainage the area has. And there's different instructions online, and I'm going to give you some material, some references for that. But basically, it's digging a hole, putting water in there to see how long it takes to drain, and then you do it again, see how long it drains, and then you can figure out, okay, if it's well draining or not. And again, you can get the specific information, instructions on the different websites that we'll give you reference to. Okay, very important, and a lot of people just go, oh, I don't want to do this. Do get your soil tested by a lab that is absolutely certified by the Agricultural Laboratory Testing Association. Do get your soil tested. It's best usually to do it in the fall, but the second best time is right now. You need to understand what your soil has in order for you to give the appropriate amendments to it so you can be successful. When you do get a soil test, ask for the recommendations on amendments on how to fix it, because sometimes when you get a soil test, it'll just tell you what you have going on in your soil. Okay, great. But if you're not a scientist, you don't really know what that means. So they'll do interpretations for you and then tell you what that means in terms of the amendments and also and how much and when to do it. Okay, for your raised bed, it needs to drain well. It needs to have a good amount of nutrients. You can make your own or you can buy it. There are some already prepackaged raised bed mixes. But you'd also need to yearly, you need to put some good compost in there just to make sure that the nutrients are still up to date. And we have a recipe down there, move my thing, that you can make your raised bed soil with. And also the links that we'll provide will have recipes for different raised bed soils as well.
Hey, Cynthia, do you have a specific place to send soil tests, or is that in the QR codes at the end of the section?
Okay, so yeah, so there will be the University of Illinois Extension has, I wouldn't say a list, but it has some links to places where you can get your soil tested. The Extension Service in our state does not provide the soil tests like so many other states do. But you can send it off to one of the many different places. There aren't, strangely, they're really not in our area. They're very much downstate. The one I use a lot is in Michigan, and they turn it around within a week or two. It's very, very fast, and it's very, very affordable relative to the types of information that they're providing for you. It's invaluable if you really want to improve the soil in the area and to make sure that you get really high yields.
If you use large fabric containers, do you need to replace the soil each year?
No, I don't. A lot of people think you have to. I usually don't. I like to, if it was good quality soil that you started out with, I like to amend with a good organic compost, and we sell a really good version here. Absolutely just add, I'd say maybe even like half and half. I would do a really nice mix, let it sit for a couple of weeks, and then you can start planting it.
Can you just mention the name of the Michigan company again, please, for the soil testing?
I knew that was going to come up. I think it's like, dang it. I think it's called Great Lakes Labs or Testing Services.
I'll do a quick Google search.
Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit about how you feel about landscape fabric inside a raised garden bed?
Ugh. Landscape fabric?
Yes.
I like to use landscape fabric for crafts. That's what I use landscape fabric for. I'm not a huge fan of landscape fabric unless I'm like maybe blocking a drainage hole in a pot, like a houseplant or something. Landscape fabric it tends to get in the way when everything grows through it, which invariably it will. So, I mean, I've seen all sorts of benefits touted about this and that and the other. I'm like, oh, I've yet to see a landscape fabric that actually does what it's supposed to. So I'd much rather use cardboard. If you're trying to, if it's for weed suppression, things like that, there are lots of different alternatives that will actually work. Landscape fabric is not one of those, in my experience. Okay, so for straw bales, you actually do need a little soil. I mean, hardly any as compared to the other options. You only need the soil for when you're starting seed on it and when you're putting your transplants in there. And again, this is after that straw bale has been conditioned. So in other words, it started to decompose already inside. So when you dig your hole, like your little hole for your transplants, you're going to want to put some soil in there, and then you're going to want to put your transplant in there. And then similarly, when you start your seeds, you're going to want to put about a 2-inch layer of soil on top of your straw bale. And then you're going to seed it, right? And then you're going to water it gently. And then you're going to go from there. And that's really the only kind of soil you need. You can use, you can make your own mix of topsoil and compost, or any kind of bagged organic raised bed soil is going to be absolutely fine for this. Okay, container soil. Okay, so do yourself a favor, absolutely stick with soil that's formulated for containers because it has to be lightweight and it has to be well drained. A lot of the garden soils that you'll see, topsoil, they're way too heavy and has way too many microbes, bad microbes in there. And it's not going to drain the level of draining that you need for the container. So you do need to buy pre-mixed potting soil or what they call a soilless mix. And we sell a really, really good one that I love growing in. You'll get great results with this. It's called Container Potting Mix, or Growing Place Choice. And it's good stuff. Again, buy the highest quality soil you can afford. It will pay off in spades. And I've done both. And you can absolutely tell a difference with the cheaper stuff, not only from the amount of like pieces of plastic that you'll pick out from it invariably, but also you'll just notice your yield and your plants will be much stronger. Okay, here's a pro tip that's very important and it's going to be very relevant for you as in the next couple of weeks. Never, ever, ever, ever work the soil when it's wet. You'll literally destroy the structure of the soil. You'll compact it. You'll create a situation where air and water cannot move through it. Roots will struggle to grow. It's going to be really hard to work with. So how do you know if it's ready or not? You take a handful of soil, compress into a ball like before, poke it. If it crumbles, then it's ready. If it's not, it's too wet. Okay, soil amendments. What, why, and when? Amendments are mixed with the soil in order to affect a change in the soil structure, like texture, nutrient content, physical properties, things to improve overall plant health. And there's organic and inorganic amendments, like compost, aged manure, not fresh, never use fresh, coconuts, wood ash, there's sand and perlite. There's lots of different options. Okay, so I'm not going to read through necessarily all of these, but there's lots of different organic amendments that you can use. Again, don't use fresh manure. That's terrible. It's going to burn your plants. It has too much nitrogen and it's going to have a lot of weed seeds and it's gross stuff. There's also something that you may see on the market lately called biosolids. That's just a fancy way of saying sewage sludge, but it's sterilized, but use class A biosolids only if you're going to go that route.
There's a question about what you mean by wood ash. Is that something that's readily available?
I have seen wood ash sold before. Wood ash also, like if you, some people use the after a fire pit, they'll literally use the ashes in their fire pit from like wood that they know is not diseased, and they put that into their soil.
Is that something you'd recommend doing a lot of?
No, I don't. We don't need it. I've never had it and I've never had to use it because my soil tests told me that I don't need to.
Excellent.
Okay, so there is some discussion out there lately about peat moss and how it is being overmined, and it absolutely is. So a good alternative to peat moss is a coconut coir. So the peat moss has been used for generations because it holds the soil structure, it lightens it up. It's amazing stuff, but it's disappearing at alarming rates. You can use coconuts instead. It's much more sustainable, and there is a ton of it, especially in third world nations. And so they're starting to package it up and export it, and do consider not using peat moss anymore for that.
I have 2 questions about chicken poop or rabbit poop
Mm-hmm.
to use as fertilizer.
Yeah. What about
a farmer told this person to put a bag of chicken poop in a water barrel and use that to water veggies. I don't know if I'd necessarily, well, we have a granular chicken poop available here.
Yes, fresh, I would absolutely not use the fresh chicken manure, but composted chicken manure is actually better than some of the other manures out there. That and sheep manure are pretty good. Yeah, I would, if you're going to do that, like make the compost tea kind of thing, I would make sure that it is composted first before you add it.
There's another question about cotton burr for amending the soil. I don't know how available that is in our area. Because we
What
don't
was it?
grow
Cotton.
cotton burr.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's not really available in our area. I know, yeah, cotton seed sometimes is considered a soil amendment around here. Don't know much about that one, not really use that all that much.
And then do you know if coconut coir, you have to wash it because it retains salt?
If it's pre-packaged, it shouldn't necessarily need a lot of that. But you know, it's if you feel more comfortable doing that, then absolutely you can rinse it if you'd like.
And I've also had a couple questions about coffee grounds being used as a fertilizer, good or bad.
I absolutely add my coffee grounds to my soil. It just adds organic matter. It's not really a fertilizer because by the time that, especially if it's spent coffee, it's really not going to add all that much. But it is good organic matter to put in. It's like that's something you'd put in your compost pile. So I throw it into my soil and mix it in. It's absolutely fine. It just increases the amount of organic matter, organic material in your soil.
Eggshells also questioning?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, make sure that they're ground really nicely, like really almost, I like to grind them almost to a powder before I put it into my soil. And sometimes some people think that it's going to prevent like slugs and things like that. I have not seen that to be the case, but it's an organic material and it's going to help your soil.
And then there's a question about mulching around the vegetable plants and should they remove it? But my thought is that it would help add to the organic matter of your next year's bed. Okay,
so we'll talk about that here later on, but in general, you want to absolutely mulch your garden when it's growing at 100%. You don't want any bare soil at all. And then you never want the mulch to touch any part of the plant at all. You want to make sure there's a nice ring around, like at least like 2 or 3 inches away from the main stem of your plant.
Okay, one last eggshell question, then we're going to move on. Do you need to heat them to sterilize them?
If you have organic eggs, that's less of an issue. If it's non-organic or conventional, you can if you want to. I'm thinking if you're going to mix them up and put them in your soil, I don't know if the added energy to sterilize them is going to add any benefit to it. It may add a little benefit, but I don't know if it's worth the energy spend for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Here's some more inorganic amendments: pea gravel, sand, perlite, vermiculite, the sulfates. Hey, here's a little heads up about sand. There's some talk about, hey, if you have clay soil, you can add sand, especially coarse sand to mix things up. Not so much. It's going to create more of a concrete rather than help aerate your soil. So in some areas, sand might be a good idea. But if you have to use sand, make sure it's the coarsest sand possible to help with drainage. Do not use play sand. That's the really fine sand. Stay away from that. That literally will create concrete. Let me go back here a little bit. Here's somebody had a question about wood ash. You use it to make your soil more alkaline. We absolutely do not need to make our soil more alkaline. So there's really no need for it. It does add a little bit of calcium and potassium. So is it going to hurt your soils? No, it won't. I would just do it the season before I would be planting to add it in, or like maybe like several weeks before. So it can get used to, so it can break down a little bit. Oh, also gypsum. You can buy this in big box stores. There's lots of big bags of gypsum pellets and things like that, because they say it's really going to help our clay soils to amend it. Yes, if your soils have a lot of sodium in it as well, and that happens mostly in the western part of the United States, We generally don't have high sodium or sodic soils here, so gypsum is not going to be very helpful at all. It's going to be literally a waste of your time and money. Okay, when to add soil amendments? Added before the growing season, and then especially if you have clay soils, but really follow the advice on your soil test and your soil analysis. That is really what's going to help drive the right kinds of soil amendments and the right timing and the application for it. However, that being said, compost you can add anytime as an amendment, whether it's ahead of time for the season as a top dressing, like for on top of literally of your like near your plants, or you can use it as mulch sometimes, anytime during the growing season. For new beds, I found that 2 to 4 inches of incorporation before you plant is really good. Existing beds, 2 inches is fine. Manure-based composts are going to be higher in plant available nutrients. Make sure though that it is composted, or at a minimum that is aged compost or aged manure, because you do not want fresh at all. Okay, so if you have clay soil in your vegetable garden, this is what you need to do if you want to make it better and better every season. And again, this is an ongoing process. Keep going, fight the good fight. It's going to be a thing. Use a hand spade or what's called a broad fork to incorporate about 2 to 4 inches of organic matter into the top 5 inches of soil, and do that every season. That's what you have to do. And those are examples of things that you can use, not necessarily one of them, but you can use a mixture of those. Shredded leaves, straw, perlite, composted manure, that's all going to help. Okay, here's a little pro tip about rototilling. There's lots of different camps on this. We do not recommend a lot of rototilling unless you're creating a garden from scratch in a very like hard pan or heavy clay area. Tilling an already cultivated area can actually be very damaging to your soil. Some people call it the best weed seed planter ever because it literally brings up weed seeds that stay dormant for years. Maybe some weed seeds can stay dormant for 10, 15 years. You're going to bring up a lot of weed seeds if you rototill, so a lot. And also, if you already cultivated your land, do try to use that at a minimum because it destroys the structure and it's going to actually compact your soil. So I know some people feel very strongly one way or another, but that's just one thing that we want you guys to consider. Here's a bonus pro tip. There's a difference between soil amendments and fertilizers. Okay, so sometimes you'll see it used interchangeably, even in like a lot of the university websites I was researching, use them interchangeably. Amendments just improve the biological and physical condition of the soil, right? It indirectly affects the plants. Fertilizers are more of a source of available nutrients for the plants to take up. That has an immediate or has a short-term effect on their growth. We'll talk a little bit about fertilizers here soon, but know the difference between the two because amendments take a little longer to have an effect, and it's really to concentrate on the soil rather than the plant. Okay, here's some sources for soil management resources. So that link or the QR code on the left is for the soil testing lab recommendations from the University of Illinois Extension. That they recently within the last year or so, they updated the information. And then on the other side, we've got, if you want to learn more about organic matter and soil amendments, the University of Maryland has a really, really good website has a lot of great information on it. Okay, planting at the right time. We are located in hardiness zone 5B. Okay, this is hardiness zone tells us what's the lowest temperature range where a plant is known to grow well. It also tells us when we can plant safely outside of the vegetables because warm season vegetables need warm weather. So here's what the map looks like. This was actually updated in 2012. And our zone used to be 5A, but it's now 5B, which means we're getting a little warmer. Okay, so the big things to keep in mind when you're figuring out when to plant, you need to understand when our first and last frost dates are in our area and how much time it takes for a crop to mature. Our first and last frost dates in mid-May, that's when we usually have our last frost, right? And our first frost usually happens in mid-October, usually around the 15th. Okay, so what can you plant outside? For cool season vegetables like carrots, turnips, radishes, peas, early spring, like even before the last frost date, and as well as in the fall, again, when it starts cooling off a little bit, you can start planting those again. Some of those vegetables can withstand a light frost without being hurt, and some of them actually are improved. The sugars actually improve or get stronger, and so they taste a little bit better. Now, when we have warm season vegetables, like the traditional ones like tomatoes, squashes, pumpkins, eggplants, things like that, they need warm weather. That's late spring to late summer. You can grow them, plant them outside after the last frost. They need warmer temperatures at night. They need warmer temperatures during the day. Frost will absolutely kill them. And it's really sad to see that, especially the beginning of the season. Okay, what vegetables do well in our area? Almost everything. However, some vegetables need a longer growth time in order to harvest than what our area or our zone is going to allow. So it makes sense then to start these plants ahead of time and then put them outside as soon as the weather is good for it, as a start or as a transplant. These are usually warm season vegetables. Others can be started from seed directly outside, and they'll be fine and they'll harvest within our growing season. We call that direct sowing. Okay, so here's some examples of direct sown versus transplant vegetables. Best things to transplant: tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, because of, again, the duration of maturity that they need. Okra as well. Broccoli, cauliflower, even though those are cool season vegetables, they're much better started as a transplant in your garden rather than from seed. And then onions as well. Starting seeds from onions can be a little tricky and it takes forever. To direct sow from seed, very easy to do. Beans, they grow like crazy. Cucumbers, pumpkins, zucchinis, peas. They don't like to have, their roots don't like to be disturbed like after they start growing. And also in anything that grows below ground, you absolutely want to start from seed, like radishes and carrots, beets, turnips. Start those from seed. They don't transplant at all. They're terrible. Okay, so there's a lot of words thrown around like organic and conventional, heirloom and hybrid. So organic or conventional is just a method of farming, right? Organic has principles of biodiversity baked into it. It provides plant nutrition, fights weeds. However, it produces lower yields than conventional, and it requires more land in order to produce the same amount that conventional farming does. Conventional relies on chemicals to fight weeds and pests and for nutrition, but they do provide higher yields and requires less land. Now, when it comes to heirloom versus hybrid, heirloom varieties, a lot of people swear by them, and it takes a lot longer to grow and a little bit more tricky to grow, but the flavor is really nice. Varieties have been around at least for 50 years or so, and their seeds are what they call open pollinated, means they're naturally pollinated by the rain and bees and wind. And each generation of seed carries the same attributes of the parents. It's not going to be different. However, hybrids, they're created by two specific varieties that were bred for a particular superior trait. And it has the best characteristics of those parents. If you save seed from a hybrid, it's not known what exactly you're going to get. It's not going to be true to what that plant was. Okay, and here's some planting resources. There's a really, really good spring and fall planting date chart from the University of Illinois for northern, central, and southern Illinois. Really good. I use that a lot. Also, the National Garden Bureau has a frost date lookup tool if you're not in our area, as well as an interactive planting calendar tool for different zones. Okay, you got to take care of these guys. You've done a lot of work up to this point in your garden, but now it's time. It's go time. You need to water the right way. We need to mulch. We need to do lots of things to make sure that they continue to grow. A big thing that we see about watering is that a lot of people don't know how to water well. And actually, if you water them wrong, they could die. You could kill them. This is a picture of a lady who was actually watering the soil near the plant and not the plant itself. And I thought that was really nice. It's better to water deeply 2 or 3 times a week rather than giving a little water every day. That's because if the more deeply you water, the roots will go down to go get that water, and it'll have a stronger root system. If you're not sure if it's ready to be watered or not, just do the finger test. You stick your finger in, and if it's still dry about an inch, inch and a half down, then it's probably needs some water. It's always best to water in the morning, but the second best time is whenever you can get to it. Okay, please don't do that. You see this guy is just literally spraying water on top of the plant. It's bad news. You don't want to do that. It can spread pathogens. It can wreck your plant a lot. Straw, bale, and container gardens dry out faster than the other methods. And again, always water the base around the plant, not on the leaves. And interestingly, if you water during the heat of the day, there's a good chance that soil is not even going to make it down into the ground because it evaporates. So not good. However, what can help with that is mulch. Adding a layer of mulch covers the soil, it retains moisture and moderates the soil temperatures. And importantly, it reduces disease by the water splash up when it rains or when you're watering. It prevents water from getting to the underside of your plants. And that's a big disease vector. It helps prevent that. It helps block weeds. And all you have to do is, I just put straw. I'm very simple when it comes to that. The more simple, the better. About 2 to 3 inches on top of the ground. Make sure you don't touch the stems. And then you need to replace it every once in a while when you start seeing bare ground. Okay, some different mulches for the vegetable garden. We have straw, which I love. We sell here as well. Compost, pine needles, untreated grass clippings. Make sure it's untreated. All right. And you can also use shredded leaves. There's also an inorganic option for black plastic and clear plastic. Black plastic is mostly used to heat the soil in the spring, but it is going to burn your plants if you don't take it off. Clear plastic as well. Clear plastic will actually be hotter than black plastic, and it lets the weeds grow through it, which is not great. So make sure you take that off, or really, really, really water your plants in the summer if you need to. And please avoid using rubber nuggets. That's awful. It has carcinogens in it. Crushed stone, marble, or gravel. Those are better for perennial plantings, not for vegetable gardens.
I have a couple questions on using grass clippings as mulch.
Yes.
It's a good idea to use them.
As long as it's not too thick, because they're very thin and they can compact. And if that's the case, then it's really going to prevent water from going in, and it's going to prevent the transpiration that's needed, and it's going to hide a lot of bugs. So a lot of bugs are going to love doing that in there. A lot of people think it's too much nitrogen in there. Nitrogen moves quickly through the soil. It's not really stored in the soil. And plants need a lot of nitrogen. I've not seen any nitrogen issues when it comes to a lot of like grass clippings on there. Just make sure you don't put too much on there. And it'll probably have to be replaced every once in a while. So make sure you keep an eye on it. You can also do a mix of like straw and different organic mulches as well. You don't have to stick with just one. As long as you cover the soil, that's the most important thing. Okay. Oh, look at this. Okay. Also need to manage the weeds. They will compete with your plants for nutrients, and also they are a disease vector and an insect vector in your garden. So that's a way for insects and diseases to march right into your garden, is through the weeds. If they're really close to your vegetables root system, just cut them down at the base of that weed plant. Don't yank them, because that could actually hurt some of the more shallow rooted plants that you have. A good layer of organic mulch will help suppress weeds. And please reconsider using a chemical weed killer so close to your vegetable garden. It doesn't take much to just pull weeds, and especially if you start early and get the weeds and keep on top of it, it doesn't take a lot of effort at all. Now, if you let it go for a couple of weeks and it just gets crazy train in there, then it's going to be tough. It is. But don't lose hope. Just keep doing it. I mean, you're going to have some level of weeds in there, but just make sure you get like big ones and make sure they don't take the nutrients from your plants.
Could you clarify conditioned straw bale, please?
Conditioned straw bale? Straw bale that has been conditioned means that on the inside of the straw bale, it has started to decompose. So there are several things that you can do, and the links that we provided via the QR codes have specific recipes or steps that you need to take in order to condition or get the straw bale decomposing. So you want it to start rotting. I guess it's a fancy way of saying rotting. Okay, so next thing is, here's just little basics about how you feed your plants. There's 3 major, they're called macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, sometimes called potash. Nitrogen is most important. It promotes overall plant growth. It also gives leafy greens a lot of energy that it needs. However, please, nitrogen is really good for things like corn and grasses. Not so great when it comes to tomatoes. So if you have something that's really heavily nitrogen, you're going to get great leaves, but you're not going to get a lot of flowers and you're not going to get a lot of fruit. That's where phosphorus and potassium come in. So when you take a look at your bags of nutrients, you're going to see different levels of NP and K. And you want to make sure it's as balanced as possible. And sometimes, depending upon what time of the type of season or time of the season it is, you may want to do a little bit lower on the nitrogen than the other two. When it comes to fertilizers, your soil tests are going to help, and you're going to look at your plant to see what it needs. Give only what the plant needs and only fertilize near the plant, because if you do a broad fertilizing everywhere, you're going to feed the plants and the weeds. They love fertilizer too. Too much will burn the plant and it'll make this plant more susceptible to disease. And if you feed it too much, if you love it too much, and it's going to grow in ways that it's just going to be more susceptible to disease. And when disease sees a likely target, it's going to take it and attack, and it's going to kill your plant. I mean, always read and follow the instructions that's on the label. That's a lot of good information in there. If all else fails, and if you get lots of conflicting information about something, read the package and see what they have to say, and that's what you should follow. Okay, there's granular and there's liquid fertilizers. Granulars are more fast release sometimes, on a slow release mostly. They need to be watered in after they're applied. And then you also have liquid fertilizers if you really need to give a plant a quick boost, but a lot of that seems to be leached from the soil or just goes right through. I've not seen really any benefit from a liquid fertilizer. I've had more success with granular fertilizers. Okay, you need to fertilize at planting for the first time, right? And also when they're growing the most. So follow the instructions on the bag for when you're establishing a plant or a garden. And also the specific vegetable has a specific time when fertilizer is needed. And there's many available guides online for that. And we're going to provide you with a couple of QR codes for links to those. Okay, so lots of discussion about organic and inorganic or synthetic fertilizers. In my perspective, there is a use for both. There is good mix for both. Organic fertilizers, obviously, they not only help the plant, but they also help condition the soil. They're low concentration of nutrients, and they're always derived from plant or animal sources, things that were alive at one time, like fish emulsion, blood meal, bone meal. And again, they enhance the soil and they enhance the microbes around it and enhance the amount of organic matter. Inorganic or synthetic fertilizers, they're highly concentrated and they go through a manufacturing process. Typically, they're water soluble and easily absorbed by the plant. Because actually, one of the reasons why organics take so long sometimes to work is because it has to be converted in the soil to an inorganic, into a form that it can be absorbed. It's not like that when it's an organic. Inorganic fertilizers are ready to be taken by the plant and used immediately. It's fast acting. Nutrient levels are precise. You know what you're getting, but it can be high in salts, which can build up in the soil, and it can hurt your soil microbes. So there's pros and cons to both. So you can figure out what kind of fertilizers your plants in your garden needs, and then what you're most comfortable with, and go from there. Okay, remember, you're fertilizing the soil, not the plant necessarily. You want to water the plant before you fertilize, then you apply the fertilizer, and then water in again. That's going to help the plant or help the soil or help the fertilizer get taken into the soil nicely. And please keep it off the leaves and away from the stems. You will burn your plant. Doesn't matter what kind of fertilizer it is, it's going to hurt. Now, here's some really good weed identification tools. There's a diagnostic tool University of Minnesota has. It's a nice one. And these are vegetable fertilizer guides from Maryland and Washington State, which are, I found, really some of the better ones in the United States.
Cynthia, I missed inserting a drip irrigation question on the watering section.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the best way to water the different types of plants on a drip irrigation system?
Drip irrigation systems, let's see. The plant is going to tell you what it needs. So as long as the plant gets at least 1 inch of water per week, then it doesn't, then a drip irrigation system can really help be consistent with that. And drip irrigation systems are really good for preventing things like blossom end rot when it comes to like peppers and even like squash or anything with fruits like that. Because most people think that blossom end rot is because if it's a calcium deficiency. Not really. It's a watering and consistently that's making that happen. There may be plenty of calcium in your soil, but if the water is not there, the soil can't really help the plant take it into its roots. So that's why they get blossom end rot. So that will help with that. Sometimes drip irrigation systems can provide too much. You just have to watch what your plants are telling you for that. But as long as you get at least an inch of water per week on your soil or for your plants, then that should be fine.
Do you know why fertilizer manufacturers would add sodium to their mix?
I don't know why specifically, but just in my experience, why they would add that is some soils could need it, and so it is considered a nutrient. That's the only thing I could think of. I don't know why. Maybe it's a byproduct or something. I'm not sure. I can find out though. Okay, you'll also have pests and diseases. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You will get pests, you will get diseases. Sometimes you'll get two, maybe more. The best thing you can do is just be prepared, know how to handle them when they do show up, okay? And when your garden is within sight of you every day, you're gonna see these fast and you can act on it. Okay, so what we would love to see you do is use a strategy called IPM, or Integrated Pest Management. It's really a process of many different actions you can take to prevent the diseases and the pests from making major damage in your garden to begin with. And it's also using the least toxic method first, and then going up, we call the triangle, all the way to what we call biocides. So using chemicals to get the result that you want. There's lots of different ways of different control methods you can use. Again, least toxic first to the most toxic. And also, that does not mean that you're going to completely eradicate all the pests or all the disease. You have to figure out what level of pest pressure you're okay with, because you can have all sorts of diseases in your garden, but the plants will still produce. And so if the goal is to still have plants that produce, then maybe you don't have to put a chemical on that plant in order to take care of the disease. So you really have to figure out, okay, is this, whatever this is this worth putting a chemical on there? Sometimes yes, most of the time no. Okay, so here's an example of what we call the pyramid of tactics for crops. You start with cultural, and then you go up to physical and mechanical interventions you can do, biological interventions, and then chemical interventions. And that's like pesticides and things like that. So everything we've been talking about actually does fit into the IPM strategy. Everything from choosing the right site, the right plants, doing some crop rotations, all of that fits into the whole integrated pest management process. Okay, and one big thing you can do is attract beneficial bugs to your garden. You, again, to reduce the amount of insecticide that you use, you can actually have nature take care of it for you. Plant flowers around your garden and in your garden. I'm a big fan. Not only is it beautiful, but also it does attract a wide range of predators that will take care of the bad bugs that you want to get rid of. Garlic chives, fennel, sweet alyssum, those are really good options. Little flower, like little bitty flower types, really nice for that. All other things are like sunflowers are nice, cosmos, blanket flowers, and cone flowers also attract a lot of the good bugs or predators that we want in our gardens. Okay, so here are some really good disease and pest management resources. The IPM guides from different areas. And also, I love this one. What is this bug? I use that tool a lot from the University of Minnesota. It helps me figure out, like, oh my God, is this a good guy? Is this a bad guy? What do I do? Because a lot of times, if you figure out what kind of bug it is, usually a lot of times it's going to be a good bug and you leave it alone. If it is a bad bug, it tells you what it is and then how to take care of it. And usually it's picking it off. We're big fans of just picking it off and putting it into a bin of soapy water. So you don't have to put any chemicals on your plants. Okay.
Since I had a couple questions relating to this, is there, for tomato blight, somebody has space pruned, and she's always not had success. Is there something that maybe she should be watching out for to avoid the tomato blight?
Okay, tomato blight, I understand, overwinters in our soils. It could be, okay, making sure that there's good hygiene in the garden is going to help prevent. And also, what could help is if you start early with an organic fungicide, that could help as well. If you start as soon as you, like maybe a couple weeks after you plant your tomatoes, just put a light application of an organic fungicide on it. That might help reduce the pressure of the disease or prevent it altogether. Usually when you start seeing the disease, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to eradicate it completely. And so you're just trying to get it to a point where it's not going to destroy your plant. You just want it to keep producing. So, with the blights, I know there's quite a few effective organic controls on the market that you can start using earlier, before you start seeing the pressure show up on the leaves.
And then I had a question about Japanese beetles. They have done the soapy water method, but there's too many to control. Do you have any other suggestions? No. I know we do not really recommend the traps because that just attracts all the beetles to your yard.
Yeah, it literally does. You'll have worse Japanese beetle problems if you use the traps. However, if you have a neighbor you don't particularly care for, who knows? I mean, you could put it right at your property edge. Who knows?
We're not recommending that, Cynthia.
No, never. Would never recommend that at all. For Japanese beetles, there are some products on the marketplace that can actually turn the leaf that they like to eat, especially beans. They love beans. That helps turn the leaves a little bitter, so they don't like it anymore. So you could use that. And also, I have reduced the amount of watering that I do on my lawns because Japanese beetles need lush, flush lawns to lay their eggs. And so the more lush and beautiful thick your lawn is, the more Japanese beetle eggs potentially you're going to have. And the more Japanese beetle pressure you may subsequently have as well. So I and my neighbors, we stopped watering our lawns so much during the summer, and we've had less Japanese beetle problem. I'm not sure if that's the actual reason why, but I know that that is a way to reduce the amount that is in your area. Because if you don't encourage them to lay their eggs and have the eggs do their thing, then you're going to have less pressure. There's also some like corn gluten, I understand, that I've not used. And there's also some milky spore, I understand. There's pros and cons to both. So do your research on whether some milky spore might help with some of the grubs. But if you do find those on your plants, try to get them in the morning. They're a little dopey in the morning and they're not fully aware of things yet. They're much easier to get. So you can sneak up on a Japanese beetle and flick it right into your bucket of water in the morning, more so than other times a day. So that might help too.
Okay, and then we had a couple of questions on the organic way to treat or kill squash borers.
Oh, it's the worst. There are some organic insecticides and pesticides that you could use. But also if you do look a little bit into the IPM strategies, there are some things that you could institute before the squash borers even show up to prevent so much damage and to reduce their numbers overall. But squash borers are tough, man. It's like as soon as you see one, you're going to see a lot, and you want to make sure that you get them as quickly as you can. Sometimes you can actually pick them off because they're going to be big enough, and understand what they look like when they're younger. The younger squash borers are going to look a little different than the mature ones. So know what the young ones are versus the mature bugs, and then you can figure out if that's a good bug or not, and then take care of them then too.
Do you have any recommendations to keep the critters away from tomatoes that are still green, or your strawberries, or anything? I'm thinking fencing.
Fencing is really the only thing that's going to work. the critters or birds. Some netting is going to work as well, but physical barriers are the most effective in my experience, 100%. Now you can use two things. You can use a chemical like, some of the repellents that can work. You have to reapply after it rains, but a repellent plus a physical barrier is going to give you the best success.
And then so somebody had a question about how you actually measure 1 inch of water while you're watering. Is it just kind of best checking the soil, or do you have a super secret method you could share?
Okay, so what actually works, and it's so ridiculous. If you put like a shallow can, like an inch tall shallow can, and you literally bury it in different places in your yard or your garden rather, when that's filled up, then you know it's an inch. That's how I've done it in the past, and it actually works. Let's see, if otherwise you could measure it by gallons. I understand like an inch could be set like several gallons, but I'm not exactly sure what those ratios are. But if you want to take research into like what does 1 inch of water in my garden, how many gallons is that per plant? There are some people who have gone through those calculations, and you can figure it out that way as well. But otherwise, the little can test, like again, a shallow can in your garden is going to tell you when you've reached an inch of water. And again, it's really important. It's better to do it deeply in a lot once or twice a week rather than a little bit every day.
What do you think about using water bottles upside down into the ground and filling up to disperse water slowly?
I love doing that when I go on vacation. It actually works. The bigger the water bottle, the more water it's going to have, and it's going to provide water for a longer time. Like especially in your containers, very important to have water for your plants. And I love using the water bottle method, which is having a water bottle. You put little holes on top of the top, right, the screw cap, and you fill it with water. You turn it upside down. You put it near the soil, or near the stem rather, and then the soil will take the water as it needs it, and then it continually provides the amount of water that the soil can hold. And I've had far less plant loss during peak times of the heat in the summertime using that method.
Thank you.
Okay, so finally, when it's harvest time, you want to make sure you're harvesting and you keep harvesting. That's where a lot of people kind of like, okay, well, I harvested once and like, oh, I have to go get those beans again. It's like, yeah, the beans and other plants that have a continual harvest, make sure you continually harvest them. You want to make sure you harvest at the right stage of maturity. And so what that means for different vegetables it's going to mean different things for different vegetables. The frequency and the method is going to be a little bit different from vegetable to vegetable. And there are guides that will give you links to for that. But most importantly, do not break or bruise or nick any of the vegetables when you're harvesting, because that's going to increase the possibility of it decomposing faster, because the surface microbes get in. The less you handle them, the better, and the longer they'll last in storage. And then really try to only harvest the really high quality vegetables, because anything that's kind of looks like it's going to turn a little bit, it will turn. And there's a good chance it's going to spread whatever it has to your other diseases, to your other vegetables. You don't want that to happen. Okay. So interestingly, peak quality is usually right before the vegetable is fully mature. There are different harvesting guides where you can know the signs of when it's time to harvest something. Bigger is not necessarily better. Usually that's quite the opposite. Those big zucchini that sometimes your neighbors have, they're really fibrous and they're not very tasty. The smaller, the better usually. And pick frequently. When you stop harvesting something, it's telling the plant that it doesn't need to produce any more flowers anymore, because the number one reason why a plant is there is to produce that fruit. If the fruit's still on the plant or on the vine, it sends chemicals like, okay, stop production. It doesn't need any more. And then you won't get any more vegetables from it. So I have a picture there of beans. Especially beans is one of those vegetables. If you don't pick early and often, it's going to stop pretty fast. When you start seeing the beans start to swell inside the pod, that's when you know it's starting to to transition into, okay, stop mode. So you, even if you're not ready for some of those beans yet, just picking one or two tells the plant, okay, stimulating, like, okay, it still needs me. It's still going to produce something. Okay, very important. Harvest during the coolest part of the day if you can. Again, if you can't, harvest when you can, like especially when it's ready. Lower temperatures reduces the amount of deterioration it's going to have, and therefore you're going to have a longer shelf life. If you cannot harvest in the morning, as usually I can, I'm usually, you know, when I come home from work, then I will harvest. Make sure that you take that the harvest vegetables out of direct sun. Cover it, shade it, and then get it cooled off as soon as you can. Whether that's you have a little thing of water next to you that you can plunge the vegetables into to cool it down, or you just bring it inside and cool it off. So just make sure it's out of direct sun and it's shaded and it's cooled off as quickly as possible. Okay, here's some good resources for not only harvesting, but also for harvest and storage for freshly harvested fruits and vegetables from Utah, Minnesota, and Iowa State.
I had a couple of questions. Is using a chemical fertilizer okay on veggies?
In general, organics are better if it's something you're going to be eating, because you don't necessarily know what the source of the synthetic fertilizer is going to be. However, on the flip side, if you're seeing that your crop is in desperate need of a particular nutrient and it needs it fast, otherwise the whole thing is going to go, then you could consider using a synthetic. Just depends on what you're most comfortable with.
Okay, and then another question about how to keep your grape tomatoes from getting leggy.
Okay, grape tomatoes, you can prune them actually. You can prune them so they become more bushy rather than tall. So you can cut them down, and there's the resources online, but you absolutely remember you're in charge of your vegetables. You will tell it how far it can grow and how wide it can grow. So make sure that you can prune them. You can start early with it. And especially as you start noticing, like, you know, offshoots and different kind of funky, you know, branches here and there, you can definitely cut those off, and that's going to help them not get so tall and leggy.
What about planting tomato plants in the same spot 2 years in a row or in multiple years in a row? Recommend or do not?
Do not recommend multiple years in a row. Now, if you have a small space and year, maybe 1 or 2 years, that might be okay. But I really, really encourage you to find another location to put those vegetables, because, you know, the microbes and the diseases that are not so great for tomatoes are going to be there year after year, and it's going to expect to be fed year after year, and it's going to be there, and you're going to give your plant not a great chance of success if you're planting it in a place that's full of bacteria and things that are bad for it. So whatever you can do, even if it's just 1 year, plant something else in it, then tomatoes again, I mean, that's preferable to having multiple years of tomatoes in the same place.
Thank you. Do you
Sure.
You had talked about using a little water bottle for your vacation. Do you have any other tips to prep your garden when you go on vacation to help it survive? Call your neighbor.
Neighbors, yeah, they're very, very helpful. Especially if you promise them, or like, especially if it's during harvest time, or if they're producing, hey, you can harvest whatever you want as long as you water, because it needs to be harvested too. So that's usually a good way to get your neighbors to help out if they get something out of it. Also, I have taken, especially with containers, I've taken like containers of vegetables and put them in like big, you know, like coolers. And I put about 1 inch or 2 of water, or actually maybe a little bit more of water in there, and then set the plant in that cooler or into that like even like a storage container. So it's surrounded by water, and it can take the water up when it needs it. Now, if I'm going to be gone for like 2 weeks or something like that, then definitely need to have somebody help you out, or a drip line you can set. But if it's going to be like, 4 days, maybe a week tops, you can do the container method where you put it in some water. So it's called like underwatering, and then using like an inverted water bottle that will definitely help. And it may rain too when you're gone, so hopefully that would help as well.
Okay, so and then nightshades in general, would you recommend rotating nightshades, not just tomatoes?
Yes, absolutely. And then I've got a list of plant families that need to be rotated. It's not just, tomato versus that, but like, anything that's in the nightshade family, like peppers, eggplants, tomatoes, they definitely need to be moved to different locations.
Okay, and then I assume if you're going to use straw to mulch, you want to make sure it's not the ones from the craft store or places where it would be for display. So
Right.
you'd want a nice clean bale of straw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then a question for the square foot gardens, the dividers, they just go on the top, right? They don't go all the way down.
Right. It's a grid and you just lay it down right on top of the surface if you want to, or you can use string. Like if it's an raised bed, you can just literally put string, like jute, like cord, and do that way too. I've done that with really good success.
Okay, no more questions right now.
Okay, so last but not least, winterizing your garden. Your garden worked really hard all season and it needs a rest. And I know you've worked really hard all season and you may want to say, oh my gosh, so the last thing I want to do is more gardening. But a few actions in your garden will really help you get the most out of your garden for the next season to set you up for success. And basically what you want to do is you want to remove all the dead material. You need really good hygiene in your garden because diseases can remain over the winter in like diseased leaves and things like that. So remove all the dead material, remove weeds. Good time to apply soil amendments if needed, right? Also write down where you put crops this year so you know what to do for next year. Also note what really worked, what didn't work so well, things you'd like to try next year. All really good to do that. Also, it's a great time to do your soil tests. Soil tests in the garden should happen maybe every 3 years. You don't need to do it every year. You can if you want to, but every 3 years is absolutely fine. Really important to cover with mulch or a plant cover crop. Absolutely crucial to do that. And then, speaking of hygiene, you need to clean all your tools and all your plant supports. It's very, very important to do that. And cleaning tools and plant support, not necessarily plant supports, but your tools, especially during the summer, very important to do that as well. To clean off every time actually you use your tools after a session, bring it in, you need to clean it off because you're going to carry pathogens from place to place. And you want to make sure that you are not the disease vector for your plants because oftentimes that actually happens. Okay, here's a little note about garden journals. A lot of people are just like, ugh, write stuff down. No, thank you. It is really helpful. You're not going to remember things like you think you will. Oh, did I put this here? I'm not sure if I put that there. If you're really interested in figuring out what kind of rotation you need to do or succession planting, having a garden journal is going to be really important for that. And you can actually make your plans for the next year. Like, oh, I saw this looks really cool. Just write something down because again, don't worry about remembering stuff. If you have a garden journal, you can just literally write it down. Okay. And as I mentioned before, cover your soil. Absolutely, 100%. If you get nothing else from this discussion here, you absolutely need to cover your soil anytime. There's bare soil, cover it up. 2 to 3 inch layer of straw or fallen leaves is fine, or you can plant a cover crop as well. And in the springtime, just remove it when it starts to warm up again. And a lot of times it has gone into the soil and become organic matter. So that's actually like a side benefit as well. Okay, here's some really good winterizing resources on how to use cover crops and what we call green manure in your garden. Much different than what a farmer would use in the fields. And also some best practices on putting gardens to bed and how to clean and sanitize your tools. And in a lot of places you'll see, there's a lot of discussion about bleach, whether or not you should use bleach. Some people are very much against it because it can really pit and damage the metal on your tools. If you have a very light bleach, maybe 2 teaspoons per gallon, that could actually help. But there are interesting ratios in this cleaning and sanitizing link that I provided you. You can use bleach or household products like Lysol, full strength, is actually really good as well, and it's not going to damage the metal of your tools like a bleach solution would. So many different options you can use, but most importantly, do clean and sanitize your tools throughout the season, and especially at the end of the season. Okay, other best practices, crop rotation, we talked about a couple of times. Again, you're just changing the planting location of different vegetable families in the garden every season, because it reduces insect damage and it limits the development of vegetable diseases, and it helps manage soil fertility. Like, for example, corn and tomatoes, they're very heavy feeders. They're going to take a lot of nutrients from your soil. So if you keep planting those particular vegetables in that location, you're going to seriously deplete whatever nutrients they're going to be needing. So you want to manage soil fertility as well when you manage do your crop rotation. So basically, do not plant the same family again and again in the same spot. Just move it a little bit. That helps.
Cynthia, I have can you go back to cover crops for just a minute? I have
Sure.
a few questions. Can you plant a cover crop in spring, or when would you plant a cover crop in spring?
Yeah, so if you have any area of your garden that you're not going to be planting, you can plant a cover crop at any time. You can do it in the spring. And a lot of the cover crops in our area are very useful to plant in like August. When you have other things growing, you can start putting your cover crops in there. You want to choose a cover crop that's considered winter kill, that it is going to kill off the cover crop and just have it die in your in-ground or your raised bed, because that adds organic material to the soil as well. You can play, most of that is going to be August to maybe beginning of October. That's about the time when you're going to plant a lot of the cover crops for an active garden during the growing season.
Okay, and then real quick, cover crops are crops that you plant to cover the soil, basically. Yep.
That's it.
Definitely.
Yep.
Would you, while it's not being used for veggies?
What's that?
Covering the soil while it's not being used for veggies, basically.
Right. And again, I mean, if there's a lot of space between different vegetables you have in your particular area, you can absolutely put a cover crop in there. Just because if you want to cover any soil that is exposed, and that could be a cover crop or straw or any other organic mulch.
Would you use winter rye?
I have used winter rye. I think that's going to have a little bit more effort in the spring to take care of than like an oats will, but the links that you will have are going to tell you which ones are best for different types of gardening applications, and then what's the best for like tilling under. Because for me, I want to get the most amount of vegetables for my garden and the least amount of work possible. So I want to choose a cover crop that's going to be like, okay, I don't have to kill it, I don't have to rip it up. Perfect. So you're going to find whatever level of cover crop like energy you need to spend on that for your situation. So again, there's some easy till ones. There's some ones that are a little bit more challenged or a little more complex. There's lots of different benefits, and those links will tell you which ones will be the best one for you.
I think I have one more question. Oh, the Epsom salt debunking, or there's a question about is it good or not?
Okay, so Epsom salts, it is, I have not come across a study that has said Epsom salts are a big benefit to your garden. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there, but I have yet to see a research-based result promoting the use of Epsom salts. So that it does provide a lot of magnesium in there. So it depends on what your soil needs. If it needs a little bit of magnesium boost, that could be an option. But really find out what your soil needs first, and then Epsom salt may be something you can put into the mix of things to improve the soil. Otherwise, do I put Epsom salts in with a tomato plant? No, I don't. My soil doesn't need it. So there's a lot of sites out there that will tout this, that, and the other. And it's like, yeah, it's more entertainment and anecdotal rather than proven. Is it bad? Not necessarily, but just something you may want to keep in mind. So here are some crop rotation fact sheets and how to use crop rotation in the home vegetable garden. If you just do like an online search about crop rotation, you're going to get a lot of information based on people who have 75 acres of croplands to take care of. That's not going to be relevant for you and actually very confusing. So these two sources are really good for the homeowner, for people who have just, a space for their own growing of vegetables and what crops are more appropriate for that than others.
I think I got all the questions. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, and then real quick, succession planning. Succession planning is a technique to get a lot of vegetables out of your space in a season, where basically you plant successive waves, what I call successive waves of vegetables throughout the season. It can be weeks apart for a prolonged harvest, or it could be planting, like for example, a tomato that is an early season producer, mid-season, or a late season, or all three. So you get a succession of harvests instead of having one big harvest, which can be a little overwhelming sometimes. It's a lot of vegetables all at once if you do it right. And it's like, oh, the good news is you did it right. The bad news is you did it right and you've got a ton of vegetables. Well, succession planting is going to help you get really a lot of the vegetables that you love in a very manageable way. And it also uses the soil throughout the season, so you don't have to use, you don't have to put a lot of mulch on there. Okay. As we said, so, oh, you also plant, okay. So with succession planting, you can do a lot of one vegetable. Like for example, I love planting bush beans. I plant them every 2 weeks in the area I have in the summertime, starting from what, mid to end of May, all the way until probably mid to end of July. I can plant bush beans every 2 weeks, and I'll have a successive harvest of bush beans. It'll last me a long time. I love eating them off the vine in the garden. They're really good. So you can do that. You can also have like, okay, if you want to put bush beans there, and then when they're done, then you can put another vegetable in that same space, and then another vegetable after that. So it's a succession of not only the same vegetable like every 2 or 3 weeks, but also a succession of different vegetables in the same space throughout the growing season. So you're really using all your space to the best of your ability. So this may be something that if you're starting out, it may be a little overwhelming. That's okay. That's something that I want you just to be aware of that you can do when you're ready for it. A good example is like planting blocks of radishes. Blocks are a really good way to lay out your garden if you want to do succession planting, because it's very clear like what's ready to be harvested and what therefore the land is available for the next vegetable. You can do radishes in the spring. Then right after that, when they're done, you can put zucchini in there. And then when zucchini's done, you can put radishes again because they're a cool season vegetable. And by the time the zucchini's done, it's going to start, the temperatures are starting to cool down and you can start planting radishes again. Okay, so there's real quick about how to succession plant. Single crop, multiple times, plant seeds, maybe every 7 to 21 days. Again, finding varieties that are early, mid, and late harvests. And then again, planting in blocks or the wide rows help keep a very orderly succession neat and clear. Here's some general guidelines. We also have this information in our new plant guide. So don't worry if you don't get all this information now, it'll be the same information will be in our plant guide, which is out soon. So you can start in April to June. You can do those vegetables, lettuces, radishes, mid-May to like July, bush beans. And you can also do second plantings of cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower 4 weeks after you plant the first wave of them. Then 8 weeks, after 8 weeks, you can do squash and cucumbers. So you plant them in like in May, right when the weather is ready. Then about 8 weeks after that, you can plant another one and you'll have 2 harvests of them. And here's some good resources for those. I like looking at universities that have the same kind of weather that we have. especially University of Minnesota, they have a lot of great information for backyard gardeners, and the weather is relevant to what we have, if not a little more harsh. So you know that the information is going to be very relevant. Okay, and then finally, this may raise the hackles of some people, but companion planting. Companion planting has been long touted as a way to combine 2 or more plant species together so they get mutual benefits from each other for like growth, flavor, pest control, things like that. Like for example, marigolds next to bean plants because it'll deter insects. In my opinion, and a lot of others as well, companion planting is more of a myth rather than real. It's very entertaining and it's interesting to look into, but the amount of scientific proof that a lot of the purported companion planting mixes provide is just not there. So there are some studies out there that say, yes, marigolds are very good for deterring nematodes, which can be they're like little soil-borne insects in your soil that will destroy the root systems of some things. But marigolds do prevent those from happening, but you need to put marigolds as a cover crop the season before an area in order to get the nematode preventing benefits of it. So there's some research that needs to be done to see if this is something that you want to do, to spend your time and your money on before you actually spend it. So I wanted to give you 3 different sources of information about companion planting so you can determine for yourself what you want to do with this, if anything, and you can learn a thing or two. And then one thing that I think is really important to understand is that instead of looking at like, okay, do tomatoes love so-and-so or this, that, and the other, take a look at what kind of overall diversity you have in your garden. Having a diverse amount of flowers and vegetables is a good way for natural deterrence of disease and insects and things like that. So do your own research, figure out what you want to do. Please do not just assume that you see a companion planting chart online. If that's it, don't assume that's going to be correct. It's based mostly on anecdotal evidence rather than scientific proof. So think about that before you spend a lot of time on that. And again, these are really good resources for figuring out what kind of companion planting is right for you. Okay, and that's it. I know we've had a lot of information here. So any questions? Or any more questions, I should say.
No, not as that I can tell.
Okay.
Oh wait, I think I have one. Oh, just a thank you. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, come and see us in Naperville and Aurora as well. We love talking about vegetables, and you'll be among your people when you come to talk with us about vegetables. We love talking about plants. So come on over and talk to us anytime about plants. And presentation today, what I want you to leave from this is, or get from this is, what are the success factors for having a really successful vegetable garden? We're going to go really broad with the information, not so deep because of the time that we have available to us. So I do provide links via QR codes on each one of the sections that we'll talk about, where you can find a lot more information about the particular subject that we're talking about. So have your cell phone handy, and you can take a picture or get the link from the QR codes that we have in each one of the sections. And whether you are a new gardener or an experienced gardener, there's always something to learn. I learn something new every week, when it comes to gardening. So I hope that you get a lot of great information from this. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. All right. So, all right, so the best practices to get the most out of your garden. We'll talk about 6 different things. Beginning with a plan, taking care of your soil, getting that ready, making sure that you plant at the right time. That's exceptionally crucial. How to take care of them, how to harvest and keep harvesting, and then winterizing your garden. And for me, those are the 6 ways to make sure that not only the current crop or season that you're working with is successful, but also for future seasons. Okay, number one, beginning with a plan. It may sound basic, but you really do need to start with an idea of what you want to do. Okay, first and foremost, only plant what you like to eat. This may sound ridiculous, but there's so many people who are so excited to continue with their garden or start with gardening, and they want to plant everything, and even if they don't like it. And I'm like, okay, you can do that. So the worst case scenario is you have a bunch of things that you're successful with, but you don't like to eat. So then you're stuck with, well, what am I going to do with it? So really stay with what you like to eat, whether it's just for you or the people in your life. If you like cherry tomatoes, get that. If you don't like Brussels sprouts, then absolutely